All right, welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We did it, Brian, across the finish line, number 300. There were thousands and thousands of Persians, I want to say, but us with our paltry 300 podcasts held them at bay. Something I don't know. That reference land. That was Zack Snyder, right? Like he's pertinent. Everybody loves him. No.
Yeah, no. I enjoyed 300, Dre. You know, I enjoyed
All
it.
right. I do want the delusion of someone like Zack Snyder, where, for those that don't know, he's a popular director that did a lot of Warner Brothers movies, a lot of comic book movies, to aplomb the Snyder cut of, I was going to say, Justice League.
Yeah.
And after that was over, he was coming out saying, man, Warner Brothers has it in for me. And I'm like, I want the arrogance of a studio giving me multiple multi-$100 million movies, so like collectively over $1 billion easy, some of which failed in succession. So all of the Superman movies kept failing, and they kept giving it, it was basically like Superman failed, so they were like, well, Superman versus Batman, that failed. They're like, well, let's do Justice League, that failed. They're like, well, let's do a director's cut of Justice League. And the funny thing is, that one's an easy one where they could have pulled a Netflix and lied and just been like, oh yeah, the numbers are amazing. But even then, people were saying the numbers for HBO Max, wherever it was streaming, didn't really go up. So it's like, I want to be able to have hundreds of millions of dollars given to me over and over and over again, fail repeatedly, and then say, man, the studio that gave me over $1 billion in budget has it in for me. I want that kind of arrogance at some point, Brian. Maybe I'll become president of the United States. Keeping topical with the references. All right. Anyway, so with that said, this is the Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. And we, as mentioned, we've reached 300. Now, it's kind of funny where, like comics, keeping in that vein, we've ordered things differently. We've numbered some A. One of the things I've started to do, like with Dave Barry, who this show is going to be very much kind of in honor of, is like when I have Dave Barry on now, I call those office hours. So not the Boxscore Geek show proper. Those are office hours. So those are on a different number track. And last week, just to keep a streak, like a fake streak going, like a bloop single, Brian, I recorded just a 30-minute podcast where I read my own article and talked about it, because I love the sound of my own voice. And I called that like mini-sode 101. So we're over 300 easily, but this is for the marbles, and it's appropriate, Brian, because special week, Tom Brady has finally retired. And as mentioned, this is very much in honor of Dave Barry. We're going to talk a lot of NFL. And the funny thing is, the last episode with Dave Barry was a popular episode. And he's like, I was like, you're not going to be back forever because you're super busy. And in fact, that was a running theme in the show, was talking about wasting time on analytics for fun on the internet versus like being productive. And our point was to be mean to anybody out there that's like, Dave Barry is a outspoken critic on advanced analytics. It's like, no, he actually like publishes it and has used that to make a career, versus a lot of people, myself included, sorry about that, but like us, Brian, it's like, we have a podcast and we have a blog, and unless you're like Nate Silver, you're probably not turning that podcast or blog into a ton of money. Although with like Joe Rogan, who knows if that's what you want. Anyway, so I was like, you're not going to be back. He's like, I'll be back. And then I was like, hey, do you want to come on and talk NFL? And I'm sure that would have been fun for me to listen to you and him talk NFL. I probably would have taken a back seat there. And he's like, I'm too busy. So shocker. But we're going to talk a lot of NFL, including Tom Brady. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Andrew Wiggins. I actually gave a teaser last week on the show, Brian. I actually, the Ultimate Warriors fan, you're snatching the crown away from Jeremy Britton, other Boxscore Geeks Wages of Win
Is
alum.
that an 80s pro wrestling reference?
Interesting.
Right,
so what reference are you looking for?
The Ultimate Warrior.
The Ultimate War. Okay, so you're naming these, Brian.
No, that was a
Warriors
pun. I'm sorry. You're talking about the Golden State Warriors. I get it.
This is two in a row, Brian. So this is two pun title weeks in a row. We're making it a theme. So our last show together
I
was
regret
called
it. I regret
the
my
Golden State
actions.
I-Pest, and this week is going to be the Ultimate Warrior S, right? And then maybe
Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made. All right, so we're definitely going to talk that, and that'll honestly probably there's some other stuff. I mean, I should be happy that Jokic is putting up a second MVP season, but I am still pretty just despondent at
He
the
was
state
just
of the
named NBA
Nuggets.
Player of the Week today.
Easily. I mean, what's really fascinating is our argument would be, okay. Actually, Brian, I'll take one of the I'll pull my tangent card out of my deck. So I'm going to play one of my tangents. So I saw some people bashing Rudy Gobert. Classic, right? And I, Rudy Gobert and Aaron Rodgers are like two of these cats where I'm like, I get very conflicted that I'm like, I have to defend your production, even if you do stuff that pisses me off. So Rudy Gobert is one of these people I'm like, all right, here we go. And so Rudy Gobert, people are saying like the Jazz can't win with Rudy Gobert as their primary, like basically Rudy Gobert doesn't work in the playoffs is their argument. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because for those that have forgotten, I'm a Nuggets fan, so it's really hard to forget this. Jamal Murray, also Donovan Mitchell. So that's what's nuts is like Donovan Mitchell channeled Michael Jordan. That at least on offense. That's not a lie. And that should have meant that the Jazz, who are already better on paper than the Nuggets, should have just had a blowout. But then Jamal Murray channeled his Michael Jordan as well. And the Nuggets went on to win a 7-game series against the Jazz, where the Jazz probably were in really good shape. This was bubble basketball too. We're probably in really good shape to win a title. And so I can't really call that the Jazz failing in the playoffs when the other team has like a legendary performance and you lose. If you lose in game 7, there's nothing definitive, right? You can't go like, oh, we lost in game. It could have gone either way, right? The next year, they lose to the Clippers. And what is ridiculous about the Clippers, I think there were two parts. Dave Barry actually brought this up. One, I believe, was like Terrence Mann just went off in the game deciding game. And it's like, all right, well, if a role player is going to score 40 points on like 80% true shooting, what are we going to do? And the second thing is the Jazz had this player, Mike Conley, a player that is, he's flummoxed us for years, Brian, because we're like, very much like LeBron James, we're like, Mike Conley is eventually going to fall off, right? And he's like, nope. Well, he eventually fell off with the Jazz and he was injured and they brought him back in the playoffs. And this has got to be something that you have near and dear to the vest, the vest near the heart is what I meant to say. But yeah, vest too. Why not, Ryan? Is like Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is playing god awful right now, and you can't really fault him. He's coming back from injury. So the Jazz were like, here's an idea. We're in a game deciding game, game 6. What if we start Mike Conley? And Mike Conley went like 1 for 8 and like 5 turnovers, and the Jazz lost by like 5. So it's kind of going. It's remarkable to me to see Rudy Gobert getting bashed, and the reason he popped up is him and Jokic are 1 and 2 right now for MVP in our book. Which, by the way, I know you and I love, Brian, because in terms of death, in terms of small ball, etc. When it's like, yeah, the two greatest, the two top players in the NBA are centers and basically opposite ends of the spectrum. The ultimate defensive center and the ultimate offensive center are the top 2 players in the NBA right now. By the way, both drafted by the Nuggets. That doesn't sting at all. But just seeing people say Rudy Gobert doesn't work in the playoffs, and I'm like, that's a classic playoff point to us, which is like a 6-game, 7-game series that's decided by very thin margins is never proof of anything. And so it does amuse me. Like the Jazz, I think, are for the most part fine. I mean, they've got some weaknesses. They got some player, Boyan, let's get the name right? Is like just a terrible pickup. They could shore that up, right? They could play the right collection of players, but it's like it is always amusing to see like Gobert getting pointed at, going Gobert doesn't win in the playoffs. I'm like, the numbers don't even back that assessment.
Yeah, and Joe Ingles is out for the year now for the Jazz, so
Oof.
we'll see if that helps them or hurts them. He's getting a little bit older, but he has been, we should expect him to get back to his old self probably and be better. The Jazz are interesting. I've got maybe a subtle point for them. So their offense has been, I haven't looked at it in a few days, but it was the best in the league for most of the season, right? And one of the best offenses of all time. Part of that is just, every season the NBA gets better at offense, but their offense has been great, right? And their defense hasn't been quite as good. It's been more like 10 to 12 range, but they're moving up a little bit. So in some ways, they're kind of the inverse of the Warriors, right? Who are number one in defense, but around 10th in offense. So you could say, well, maybe that's Gobert's fault. He's the defensive player, and they should blame him for not being as good and give credit to the offensive players for having the top, offense in the league. I look at it the other way around. I'm like, you'd be 20th or 30th in defense without Gobert. That's how good he is. And,
Well,
they're.
here's a fascinating point on that. Where they're getting torched on defense is actually turnover percentage. So
Yeah.
if you kind of look at them, like I remember like the Warriors were very similar to this, where you kind of start trying to factor out defense. And so the player I'm thinking of is David Lee back in the day. Same idea going like the Warriors suck on defense. David Lee is terrible, right? And Rudy Gobert is is this is always confused me. I forget if him and Draymond Green both are multiple defensive player of the year, or if one has like two or three and the other has one. I forget. But they both finished top two in defensive player of the year multiple times. And so it's hard to be like, is Gobert the defensive sieve? It's basically the perimeter defense on the Jazz doesn't really, get steals. Donovan Mitchell leads it at 1.6, but that's it. And I mean, I could buy that part of the issue is really, like Mike Conley is old. So it could be that. And that is really weird to me to basically you go, the Jazz have the best defensive player in the league, arguably, in Rudy Gobert. The Warriors, this is going to be tough, and we might, when we get to them, we might talk more. I know we were talking this before, but like Steph Curry, and if he's 100%, he doesn't look it. The Warriors arguably have the best offensive player in the NBA, and as you noted, Jazz are number one in offense, Warriors are number one in defense.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I'm having some technical difficulties here, so I'll just say it for the audio listeners. Rudy is a 3-time DPOY. Draymond's only won it once.
Interesting. So I think the question is, should it be 2-2 or whatever? And
I didn't look at All-Star games, though. I would bet Draymond has more All-Stars, which is kind of weird. Maybe Rudy's a second-half player. I don't know.
Oh, we have much to discuss on how Draymond Green, in a fair world, should have been an all. He's a 3-time All-Star. He should have been an All-Star this year as well. He might still be, but also he might be out. So
I think he's gonna make it as a reserve and then not play in the game. That would be my guess.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. I would buy that. All right, but anyway, let's get back to football. I don't have a subtle way to tie it into that tangent. All I was basically saying is, Jokic is great. I don't have faith in the team, and him and Gobert would be my top two ballot getters for MVP this season if I had a pick. And it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be sad either way because it's looking like what you're saying. Injuries to both, a couple injuries to the Jazz, namely just Ingles, and then some bad players that are getting minutes, Boyan in particular. And the Nuggets just, you can't start Jeff Green. So here's apologies, Brian, I'll stay on this one a little longer. When we started Wages of Wins, one of the editors was James Mercado, who has since gone on to work in the NBA. I believe, at least as recently as a year ago, was still with the Mavericks, our favorite franchise. I'm old enough to remember when he wrote an article about Austin Rivers as a draft prospect, stating he was the worst top, does it make sense, of players on the draft board, like that could be drafted, because certainly there are players that have no hope of getting drafted, but Austin Rivers was on the draft board. He said he was the worst player and nobody should draft him. I'm old enough to remember that. So how the hell does a team, and the Nuggets in theory have an analytics squad? So I was going to say, how the hell does a team with an analytics squad pick him up? The Nuggets have an analytics squad, same kind of note as recently as a year ago. Another person we really like, Lane Vastrow, who we actually had as a guest on the show. And
yeah, at least once, maybe twice.
Yeah, I think it was just once, and I think we wanted a second time. He got snapped up by the Nuggets, and all of his research, poof, disappeared off the web. Which, I mean, good-ish. I mean, it's the NBA draft is so funny, where our argument forever has been, it's not that hard, you're bad at it. And then my follow-up is, you don't build a team through the draft. Like, you make the best draft picks you can, but you flip those players into productive stars immediately, or even just productive players. Like, that's the funny thing, is there are a number of top 3, top 5 picks, be contentious here, Brian, including like Joel Embiid. So at the time we
The
really
other player of the month, by the way, so tread carefully, or player of the week.
he's doing, but I mean, so by the way, so here's what's interesting on that. I'll get to him in a second, but let me finish this up, and I'll actually hit
Yep.
Embiid too. So heck, you're tricking us into doing a bunch of NBA first, but anyway, so I'm old enough to remember when he bashed Austin Rivers in the draft, and then as we're saying, really teams are bad at drafting. You don't really need special sauce, so like Lane Bashrow stuff disappearing. It's like he could leave it out there. No one's using it, which is on them. But again, the real mistake we argue is you shouldn't even be using that to build your team. You draft the best player, you leave him on the bench, you play him if you can, and you look for veterans. But James Ricardo wrote about how Austin Rivers was terrible, and he's still terrible, and he's still getting contracts, and he's on the Nuggets, and like Austin Rivers and Jeff Green, I don't get it. The Nuggets have an analytics squad. They have people we like. This is again another throwback to the Dave Barry show. At least in the early days of the analytics, the people that were hired by teams, we went over a great. So this actually never went over this. So this was cool. Off the top of his head, Dave Barry recalled that there was an article saying that the first job Dean Oliver got in the NBA, which was for the Seattle Supersonics, was for $30,000 a year, a 1-year deal without benefits, and this article about him.
Was it a full-time job?
It was a full-time job.
Jesus.
Additionally, he had some classic fun stuff where they like didn't get him credentials, so he wasn't like able to get in the game. So the article is talking about like how he was hired as an analytics person, but then also I would argue kind of the lack of respect. And there's even a fun, it's kind of an interesting one, Brian, where I kind of wound up down a Dean Oliver rabbit hole just when I was writing an article on the skill curve. And then you get in this funny territory, very much like Donovan Mitchell with the Jazz, where you're just like, I could bash so much old stuff about this person all day, but I should move on to other stuff. So that's funny. So like, this is one I'm like, it's never even going to be an article. This is all we're going to get is on the show. But so there's this old article about Dean Oliver for the Sonics, and Dave remembered that. And he was basically saying early days of analytics, like people hired by teams weren't listened to. I've got to still believe that, because despite however many fights we end up with on the net with other analytics people, it's like universally agreed upon Austin Rivers isn't good. And yet a team that in theory has multiple advanced analytics people on staff still hires him. I don't get it. It might be for things thinking, oh, we're going to woo his dad. We're going to woo Doc Rivers over, this amazing coach. I don't buy it. And then Joel Embiid, I'll say it's our classic line. He's actually been playing great lately. I think he might, probably deserves player of the week or whatever. He's still below star level, and that's but what I'll know, a few weeks ago I checked in on him, and he was like a wins per 48 of 150. He's at a wins per 48 of 180. Now, clear math means he had to have been playing significantly above 200 to pull up his rating that much. But the funny thing about Joel Embiid, a while ago we penned you did, I think it was the Russell Westbrook or DeMarcus Cousins player, the player that has, like, we called him the perfect per player, as in they have an amazing box score, but you look and they've got lots of shots, lots of misses, lots of points, lots of rebounds, lots of turnovers, lots of fouls. Like, pretty much they just, you could call them like stat stuffers. They stuff the stat sheet with all the good stats and all the bad stats. And when you add it up there, they may be average, a little bit above average, but they're not star. Joel Embiid is this player that I'm basically thinking like the ignore player, because the reason he's not as great is for his entire career, his turnovers and personal fouls have always been high. And like a Patrick thought is, oh, as you mature and get better as a player, those go down. The other really important aspect about Joel Embiid is he just cannot stay on the court. It's kind of ironic in that from an analytics perspective, Joel Embiid dropped, I'll put that in quotes, to 4th in the 2014 NBA draft. In theory, I think his like recruiting index rank, I think he was number 1. He dropped to number 3 and fell to the 76ers because people were concerned about his health. Now then, of course, he sits out the first 2 seasons entirely due to injury. His 3rd season, he doesn't play back-to-backs, only plays 31 games, never averages 25 minutes a game. It's not until his 4th season, he does become an all-star, that he averages over 30 minutes a game, 63. He plays well enough there that the 76ers feel compelled to give him a max contract, which fine. That is the only season in his career he's cracked 2,000 minutes. And even this year, he is only at 38 games, these at least as of, it's possible they're playing a game tonight. The 76ers are at 50 at the moment, and he's at 38. So, like, it's possible he will get to 68 games, and it is possible that, let's see, if he plays another 32 games let's see, what is he averaging? He is averaging, sorry, that's totals. Apologies, Brian, this has got to be boring. He's averaging 33 minutes, so he could, in theory, get another 1,000 minutes played and crack 2,000. I don't believe it. I think he maybe gets another 10, 15 games, gets a little under 2,000. And that's been the thing, is basically, if you look at the bad things about his box score and his missing, like, basically people have to ignore Joel Embiid's missed shots and missed games to make him a star. And there's something very humorous in that, right? It's going, you can't put Joel Embiid in the same category as Nikola Jokic, which people were. They were like, Jokic and Embiid. Embiid finished third in MVP that season, right? I think it was Jokic, Curry, Embiid, I want to say, last year. I think that's how it shook out. If not, I'll
wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, but anyway, so all I was going to say, though, is like, you can't ignore the fact that this guy is missing 20 games a season at minimum. You can't ignore the fact that you are never going to expect a full season out of Embiid. And so that just does remain amusing to me, in that the consensus when he was drafted was he's too injury prone, and people stepped away. And, like, I hate to say this, they were right. And I hate to say this now, is like, he's overpaid, just in the sense that you can't give a max contract to a player that is never healthy all the time. We think he's got a star ceiling. We've said this many, many times. Embiid's got a star ceiling, but just like Klay Thompson, who we'll get to in a minute, I'm sure, all of these players that leave injured and come back, they usually have a little bit of a curve to get back up to speed. And so it's like, you almost have a car that accelerates fast, brakes, has to ramp up again, accelerates fast, brakes, and that's Joel Embiid. And you're just not going to get a 210 wins produced player with that kind of player.
Yeah, and this is what we talk about a lot in terms of, our difference in evaluation of players versus the mainstream, is just production versus your skill as a player, right? Embiid's clearly incredibly skilled, and that shows up amazingly on camera. It's just when you count everything together, like you said, the misses and the turnovers and the fouls, people tend to forget about and, focus on the good stuff. I'll give him credit. He has reduced his turnovers and fouls, and he's a more efficient shooter than he used to be earlier in his career. But he's been playing, closer to 1,500 minutes the last few years. He's already up to 1,200 this season, so maybe he will get up to 2,000 minutes this year. But, yeah, I mean, I'm with you on the criticisms of him. But because he does show that potential, I think a lot of people are tantalized by it, and I am too at times. The 76ers, despite completely screwing up that debacle of a Ben Simmons situation, are not a terrible team this year, and Ben Simmons is playing well.
This is going to be a nice segue. So, Ben Simmons, we're going to let simmer. Ben Simmons, you almost tanked our podcast, pun intended. Because, as I mentioned, the joke was, Brian said, we'll be back when Ben Simmons is traded, and he's still not traded.
We're still not back.
But not 100%. We still got IR and stuff. We're semi-weekly, Brian. Played a limited rotations last week, but aiming for it. But anyway, so Ben Simmons, right? My easy argument against anything is he was drafted. The team went out of their way. Like, imagine the silliness in the real world of a company you had no desire to work for, like lighting their building on fire and saying, because I lit my building on fire, you have to work for me. And your industry going, yeah, those are the rules. Sorry about that. So Ben Simmons, there is no loyalty. There is no, he welched on a deal. The NBA rules and the draft put together make such a ludicrous system that trying to pin it on the player, I've said this before, I'm just never going to be on the side of it. And it's rough, because the reality about a lot of players, especially now with how the salary cap has kept increasing, is a lot of NBA players have basically been told they are great their whole lives because they're top athletes, and there is a pipeline getting them as young as, I don't know how soon teams start recruiting, but the Mavericks were bragging about knowing about Luka Doncic for like a decade. And they, he was coming up as a teenager. So there you go. And I just can't ever basically go 100% with, okay, so let me try and phrase this. It's really easy to say this person is probably entitled. This person probably has an attitude that would be very frustrating to deal with. This person probably has a flawed view of reality that would be very hard. And this person at this point, at every stage of the NBA, if you're a second round pick, I've looked this up before, but like you're worth millions, right? So like I'll try and look up in the background as I'm talking. But if you look at like last year's draft and you look at the very last player in the draft, I guarantee you there's still going to be like they're going to make players that are in from the 80s, etc., just like depressed by what they're getting paid. Maybe. Let me see.
I'll
So
just say while you're looking this up about Simmons, I'm really suspicious that there's another shoe to drop in the background about like him off the court. Like something's got a bunch of teams spooked about him that maybe we don't know about, because the way it's playing out makes no sense to me. Teams they're talking about like a Beal for Simmons trade right now. I'm like, that's not great for the 76ers, but what else can they do? His value is just too low for me to not think there's something else out there we don't know.
There's some beliefs about potential collusion. And so again, this is why Simmons is.
We're going to talk about the NFL soon. Yep.
But so what I was going to say is, so Simmons is perfect for those two points. One of the beliefs is it's possible that Morey has had deals, maybe with, the clutch has become a boogeyman name forever now at this point.
Yeah.
Where there might be a belief that Clutch wants him on the Lakers, and so he's waiting for that. There's other beliefs that Morey maybe was talking with James Harden, and there's been stuff going for that. And then you might wind up in the scenario, if you believe conspiracy theories, that they planned this and now they're afraid they can't get away with it, if that makes any sense. So it's possible that like Morey was like, we're going to trade Ben Simmons for James Harden. It's prearranged. Everything is set in motion. And then other teams might be like, you do that, it's fucking Chris Paul. Oh, drop one of my F-bombs. It'll be Chris Paul all over again. So, it's hard to say. This is fun stuff to speculate on, but I'm just saying, like, when you look at the zeitgeist of people being like, Ben Simmons so unloyal, just shut up and play. I'm like,
yeah, that's
I'm
bullshit.
sorry. The NBA draft, as well as the fact that the NBA links player pay directly to team loyalty, meaning the only way for Ben Simmons to maximize his contract is to get the 76ers to either trade him or give him a contract. Sorry, like that, you built it, you bought it. And the reason that goes into the NFL, though, two cases. So one is Tom Brady allegedly retiring. I think I said at the beginning of the show or pre-show, I'll believe it when I see it. One of the easy reasons, this is an old story, this harkens back to me with the Packers, is Brett Favre used to say he was retiring every season. That was a very simple bit of motivation. You're supposed to show up to training camp in the NFL. If you're an old player like Brett Favre, you don't need training camp. You're fine. And probably because football is a pretty hard sport, you'd probably rather save your body than like practice, right? Like football's this weird sport where like practice can be, the Allen Iverson practice rant in football, he'd be like, why would I practice? Don't you want me for the game? Like, don't make me practice. I might get hurt. Brett Favre would like feign retirement, come back after training camp every season. And I know Dave Barry wrote about this. He's like, yeah, it's not him debating whether he wants to retire or not. It is him saying, I don't want to go to training camp, and the only way I don't get fined, like I'm just, what would the quote be? I'm just not here so I don't get fined.
Yeah.
Right? I guess.
That's right. Marshawn Lynch. I'm just here so I don't get fined. Yeah.
I was seeing some throwbacks to the pick in the Super Bowl. And then we've mentioned the league before in passing, a show that, aged worse than Russell Westbrook at this point. But Marshawn Lynch made a few appearances on it. And there was a funny episode where someone was like, hey, can you get me a beer? And he's like, hey, I'll just walk it over. He's like, no, I'll throw it. He's like, I'm right here. I'll just walk it over. Like, just walk it right over there. Why wouldn't I walk it over there? So Marshawn Lynch has a good sense of humor about that play. Probably easy because he did win a Super Bowl, right? But it probably should have two.
Yeah, he was on that one Seahawks team, I think, right?
Did that Seahawks team beat the Broncos?
I can't remember.
I think so because I have a funny story about that. Pulling out tangent card number 2, Brian. Um, I was a friend of mine and I were watching that Broncos game against this. I know it was against Seattle. We were watching that in a bar, and it went downhill quick. And I believe the second half started with a Peyton Manning interception. I'm not 100% sure. It's so forever ago. And we were like, we're done. And I was like, I can't watch any more football. Let's go bowling. So we went. There was a bowling alley in downtown Denver. Don't know if this is still true, but at least at the time, it was owned by a huge Seattle Seahawks fan. So we go to this bowling alley, and there's a big banner on the front of it that says "Go Seahawks." And we go in, and there's no bowling, and there is no bowling because you know how bowling alleys have like big TVs that you can put stuff on. Every TV has the Seattle Seahawks game playing on it, and there's a big party going on. So people are like standing on the lanes watching the game, so we can't bowl. And so I'm like, okay, I guess we're not bowling. And while we're in there to see if there's, because like we walked to the bowling alley to see if there was any open bowling. So we walk out there to see if there's any open bowling, and the Seattle Seahawks score again when we do that. So that's my Seattle story. So they rubbed
Beast
it in.
mode.
They deserve not getting the second Super Bowl because of a pick.
I got another Marshawn Lynch quote for you. Take care of mentals and take care of your chicken. There you
Yes,
go.
we love Marshawn Lynch, and that's hopefully what Ben Simmons doing. But anyway, when it comes down to this thing about retiring and unretiring, that was the Brett Favre story. But also, here's what's really amusing is that people are going like, Tom Brady's retiring, and he didn't thank the there's so much about this, but this is one of the fun parts. He didn't thank the Patriots in his retirement. And I've had a few thoughts, but I'm like, he was I think 6th round pick, right? He was like a 6th round pick, so wasn't his choice. Like, why does like this idea that people have to be loyal in sports that have drafts is so ludicrous to me. And there's no winning, right? This argument never. The people that agree with this argument really agree. The people that don't agree with this argument really will never agree. But it's like there's no loyalty in sports, especially in sports where you are literally allowed to point and say you have to play for me. And the other part about Tom Brady that I am a huge fan of is that Tom Brady is an example about how people don't know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to quarterbacks. This is a lot of Dave Barry's research. Again, this is what we would hope to talk to him. Maybe we'll talk to him at some point about. But Tom Brady, as I noted, was drafted 6th. Tom Brady, we were talking about this pre-show, Brian, represents what makes football the perfect analytics-proof sport. Nerds cannot ruin the sport because like anything can happen. So like I mentioned to you kind of meanly, and we'll get back to it in a bit with your Warriors, that if Draymond Green doesn't come back, I can pretty much say you're probably not a title team. I'm not saying definitively. As long as you got a star, you got hope.
It's a good bet.
But Draymond Green off that squad with the Jazz, with Phoenix playing as well as they are, with Memphis playing as well as they are, with maybe Denver with Jokic, and maybe another player finds maybe Aaron Gordon finds a way to go beast mode in the playoffs. Not looking so hot. But in football, a starting quarterback on a playoff team can go down and get replaced by a backup, and that backup can take you to a Super Bowl. Now, admittedly, by the way, fun note on Tom Brady's like first Super Bowl. I want to say Vinatieri. I hope I'm getting the name right. Like, it was a horrible scoring affair that was won on like a last second field goal. So it's like, it always gets amusing when you're like, Tom Brady has 7 rings. Now there's like some fun parts. Good example. I forget the team he lost to, but there was like one of the highest scoring Super Bowls ever. And Tom Brady, I want to say 500 passing yards and multiple touchdowns, and they lost.
Well, he lost to the Giants when they're undefeated. I don't know if it was that year or not.
That it wasn't that one. It was much later. But there's
he went to so many playoffs and Super Bowls.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny where it's like you go look at all the rings he has, and I'm like, well, here's what's rough. He doesn't deserve credit for all of those rings, and in fact, again, Dave Barry, take a shot every time I mention, but he's written a lot about football, and he says it never lands because analytics does not matter in football is the key point. A lot of times Tom Brady got a Super Bowl win because the opposing team made a foolish decision. And including, like I said, Tom Brady's first Super Bowl wasn't him, but there are also Super Bowls that Tom Brady was in that they didn't win where he played really, really well and deserved it. So Tom Brady is the best. And all I'll really say about, all of his rings is, like I said, you can have a backup quarterback, the most important position in your sport, replace a starter on a playoff team and your team still wins. Whereas in basketball, you lose your star. You're probably not getting them replaced by a star off the bench. Baseball, right? You lose like a starting pitcher, you probably have to replace them somehow. So football is perfect. And the other funny note we were talking pre-show about this is the data says, and I believe there is a recent article from I want to say Victor Matheson and Dave Barry, is that revenue is not tied to performance in football. And we were talking about this in that football is too short of a season for production to matter as much. So, as an example, your Golden State Warriors are a huge draw wherever they go, out of conference and out of division. But in division, they play the same team multiple times. So, you might have Kings fans that are like, I really want to see Steph Curry. Well, they get like 6 chances. And then they're like, I did, or maybe three, right? Because they play 6 games, so it'd be 3-3. They get like 3 chances to see
Yeah,
him.
and just for those who don't know, depending on the traffic, it's like an hour or two drive between the Warriors and Kings stadiums. It's direct driving.
Oh, and yeah,
you
so,
can go to all the games for both teams, home and road.
I wasn't even doing that intentionally because I was more saying the way like let's say the Jazz and the Nuggets, right? They're in the same division, so they play each other a number of times. I might really want to see Rudy Gobert, but I see him once, and then the Nuggets are terrible. I'm like, yeah, I already saw him. I don't want to see him again. Football, we were noting pre-show, like the Broncos only play the Packers every couple of seasons. So if I live in Green Bay and I'm a huge fan of the Broncos, even if the Broncos are terrible, even if the Packers are terrible, I'm like, I got to see that game because it might not be coming for another couple of years. And, even if the team is really bad, it's like it's only 8. How does the 17 work now, by the way, for the home away split?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Is it just arbitrary for some teams? Some get
I'm just
9,
still
some get
not
8?
used to seeing like, oh, a team went 10-7. I'm like, oh, that's weird. It's usually 10-6 or 9-7. But anyway,
Well,
times change, Dre.
We're
Times
malleable
change.
people. We'll adapt. But yeah, football
Big L for the
performance.
players union there, getting that extra game thrown in. They have to play.
It's good for the fans, right? Like we
Good
like
for
it
the
more
fans.
football. I was seeing the inverse on NBA. People were saying like it'd probably be good if the NBA shortened from 82 games. It's never going to happen. It's like
No.
leagues don't contract money making things. They only expand it. If COVID showed anything, it's like sports leagues will play. It's like if they will find a way to play. Everybody can be getting COVID. They will, MLB, NFL, NHL, NBA. They all kept playing. So,
All right, can I ask you something about Brady, or maybe what you talked to Professor Barry about? Because to me, just like trying to put him in context, regardless of how good his peak was versus other top quarterbacks, right? We got Joe Montana out here. We love Peyton Manning, of course. He just played for so long. Like, it's just amazing that he played to 44 years old and was still winning Super Bowls. To me, it's like Kareem or LeBron are kind of the comparisons, just like being that good for so long. I don't know what you think about that.
Here's the rough comp because this again an off the court player I'm not liking at all right now. Like Stockton would probably be the best.
Oh, that's a good one.
I know, right? It's painful.
Yeah, fuck Tom Brady. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
I
I move back and forth between sports mode and non-sports
it's really rough
mode
because of course like Tom Brady, right? I think he had, I think there was Kofi Kingston, a WWE star. Someone was like, all of the great quarterbacks of old are leaving. He was like, fuck them all. And someone was like, why are you mad at Drew Brees? And he's like, he voted for Trump. That's enough.
Drew Brees, Drew Brees is an asshole.
And I was going to say, didn't Tom Brady had at one point a MAGA hat in his thing? I don't know if it was a joke or not, but and Kraft is really close with Trump. So
I think Brady was a MAGA supporter and is less now. But the point is, he's such a rich asshole. He can, have some kind of a dalliance with Trump. It's just bullshit. Anyway,
but I'm saying that's the rough reality of like top NFL players is if depending on your political leanings, they're probably not aligned with you. And like that was like what was brought front and center with Aaron Rodgers this last season, which sucked. Like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers are these two people that have had off the court stuff that I have liked in the past. Like Aaron Rodgers before this season would say off court stuff. I was like, yeah, that's good stuff, Aaron Rodgers. And like Tom Brady, I believe for the Buccaneers got everybody vaccinated. So it's like,
yeah,
it's hard. But I mean, I would say that like he is. And so the Stockton thing is Stockton has said a bunch of ridiculous stuff, and it's really rough. And I'm not gonna lie, like Chris Paul, thank goodness Chris Paul is playing so well so long, because I'm like, you know what, I can start kicking, I can leave Magic Johnson up there, and I can start kicking Stockton down my list on point guards with players like CP3 and Steph Curry playing so
In
well.
case anyone hasn't heard, Stockton is just full conspiracy theory now. He's saying hundreds of pro athletes have dropped dead on the court as they were playing due to being vaccinated. Like, that's the level of stuff Stockton is saying. So he's fucking bonkers crazy out there.
Yeah, normally I try and restrain myself on like ableism, but like, man, yeah, he, whatever the heck is going on with him, it's rough. And so like, yeah, when you look at players that had long peaks, I would say right now it is like LeBron and Brady. I mean, LeBron is same freaking boat, right? I don't understand how he's playing as well as he is. Kareem, the rough part is at the end of his career was terrible. We talked about that with Dave Barry as well. Just at the end, fell off, and that's what normally happens, right? Normally, if you have a great player, Michael Jordan too. No one
Dre,
likes
have I
hearing
told you this before? I don't think I have. When I was a kid, I used to play basketball in school, right, with my friends. And we would always say, "Oh, I'm gonna be this player. Like, I'm gonna be Michael Jordan or Dominique Wilkins or whatever." It was the '80s, right? Um, my friends and I all hated Kareem and thought he sucked because he wasn't that good in the mid '80s. Like, we didn't watch him play in the '70s. We didn't know.
Well, it was what's funny too is he had the dead cat. So what's funny is in 1985, right? He wins Finals MVP, has that dead cat bounce. But yeah, I mean, he was weighing down the Lakers, and it's funny. It's another one of these, right, where Jeff Pearlman's book, The Showtime Lakers, brings up that they really wanted to trade him and get Ralph Sampson, and I believe 82, and they failed. And that wound up working great for them. But long term, the logic was correct in that I think the Lakers, had they moved on from Kareem 2 seasons earlier, because what they won in 1988, I want to say, I think they won 87, 88. And had they moved on from Kareem, they probably could have maybe won in 89, because that was against the Detroit Pistons, who I believe beat them. So yeah, and I mean, of course, they were back in the finals in '91, and had James Worthy and Magic Johnson not both gotten injured, they probably could have put up a fight in '91 and still been competing in future seasons. So yeah, if they'd moved on from Kareem, I mean, they're 88 was Magic Johnson's last win. He made it back again in 1991, but there were like 3 more seasons before he retired the first time. So if they'd moved on from
Yeah, they
Kareem
did
a
beat the
little
Pistons 4-3 in '88.
88, and well, an interesting reality there, if I recall, I seem to think that in 1988, let's give the Detroit Pistons a little due.
They
I
knocked out
think
Jordan, I think, right?
they knocked the Pistons knocked out Jordan, but I was going to say I believe Joe Dumars had family issues, and I think he had a death in the family,
Oof.
and I think he left the last game. So I believe I almost want to look this up. I think in 1988, Joe Dumars didn't play in the very last game of the one that they lost, I think. And if I'm remembering this right, I'm going to be so proud of myself, and if I'm making stuff up, but it might have been the last game or the second to last. So they lost the last game by that. Yeah, not Dan. Yeah, Joe Dumars. I am not seeing him on the box score. So oh no, he's here. Joe Dumars, 41 minutes, the second to last game. Am I missing one? Joe Dumars. Maybe I'm making stuff up. Maybe I am mistaken. I will look this up later, because I'm seeing Joe Dumars. Never
'88 was
mind.
cool because that was kind of like the beginning of the Rodman era, right? Like Pistons Rodman, a little different, and he started morphing into later era Rodman. So yeah.
All right. Well, I am still foolishly trying to find the playoff series to verify that I'm not wrong. But anyway, so that being said, wow, 1989 they beat the Lakers in 4, like clean sweep. That is rough. And he played all the games in '88, so maybe I'm mistaken. Might have been the year before. I am sorry about that. Apologies for misremembering things. I thought I saw that in a documentary. Okay, let's
No one
finish up.
really remembers the '80s that well, Dre. If you were old enough, you were probably doing coke, so you know.
All right, let's finish up another. So I think Brady, not thanking. We'll believe it when we see it on his retirement. Not thanking the Patriots when I was like, who cares? I feel like quoting a Don Draper quote from Mad Men, where he's like, "That's what the money is for." You're like, Brady didn't
Hey,
thank
if
us.
it's
I'm
the
like,
'80s, we're more like Don Johnson, okay?
all right, fair enough. I love it. But Brady, basically, I'm like, the 6 rings. I'm like, that's what the 6 rings are for. Thank you.
Oh, I
Like,
see. I see.
whatever. Like, and then I also joked, I was like, what's the etiquette for multiple retirements or whatever? Because didn't Brady retire before going to the Bucks? So I was like, didn't he thank him then? Do you have to thank him again? Like, did Jordan have to thank the Bulls after retiring with the Wizards? And then I was also like, Jordan retired twice from the Bulls. So did Jordan have to thank the Bulls twice? Or he's like, I already did that once. We're good. Just fill in the gaps.
I mean,
Anyway.
Brady didn't even thank his kids or his family in his retirement. He's like, well, it's time to worry about things other than football. Like, not even, like, kind of acknowledging them, but not really.
Yeah, he's been. I mean, we've talked about like ultra rich being out of touch with reality, and that's always amusing. I don't think I have much more on Brady. I don't think he's retired. We'll see it. There was a funny Adam, I want to say Schefter, where he like leaked it early, and then people were saying he was wrong, and then who knows? And then Brady has come back out, but if he wants to come back for another season, this is the move, right? It would be kind of weird to do it this way, but we'll see. I'm still. We'll wait.
I like your
Um,
theory. I'm a little suspicious because it seems like Tampa Bay was a good situation for him. The reason I say that is people will do these retirements when it's like, I need to get off this team and I'm either going to play for someone else or retire, right? I'm not going to keep playing for this team. I think he likes Bruce Arians, the coach, and I think he likes Tampa Bay. So we'll see. But I like your theory.
Yeah, and yeah, well, it's the other one of my favorite documentaries is on pro wrestling, and there's a famous wrestler Terry Funk, and this documentary called Beyond the Mat talks about
Oh, yeah.
his retirement thing, and then like the postscript is like Terry Funk came out of retirement like right after this was
Yep.
released, and that kept happening, and I could
So
buy that, right?
another wrestler featured in that, this is late 90s, I think, right? Beyond the Mat was Jake the Snake Roberts. He's still around.
Oof.
He
Is he?
was
Are you
he's still
kidding? Is he?
around. Yeah, he's not wrestling, but he's a valet. But
Okay, well, that's thank
25
God.
years ago, Jake the Snake was in really bad shape in this wrestling documentary, and he's still chugging.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to let it go. It's hard to let go of the limelight. So I could still buy Tom Brady being around. Playoffs, I don't have too much to say. There's been some amazing games. I feel so bad for the Buffalo Bills. I mean that does go on to their legacy, the four straight Super Bowl losses, losing essentially on a coin flip. Getting let's throw this out there, Brian, because it's happened weeks ago, but I got to put you on the spot. What are your opinion on the overtime rules? Because that was a huge point of contention on the
Oh, NFL overtime rules? So I watched it for decades, right, where it was just first score wins, even if it's a field goal. So it's a big improvement over that. But yeah, I mean, college does it a lot better, right? Where instead of doing a kickoff, you start down close to the goal and you just kind of go back and forth. It's more like penalty shots in soccer, maybe. So yeah, I mean, there could be some room for improvement, but it's better than it used to be.
Yeah, it's rough in that I can see it saying this isn't a good solution, but in general, tiebreakers are difficult.
Yeah.
And I know I've complained about chess tiebreakers a lot, and the irony is the annoying answer is probably to just favor the top seed.
Mm.
So, as an example,
That'll never work though. The fans would hate it.
well, yeah, well, like in chess, my kind of so what I've said is like the last chess, not this chess championship, two chess championships ago, Fabiano Caruana versus Magnus Carlsen. Incidentally, follow up, there was just a rematch. They played a single game in a major tournament that Magnus Carlsen won. Actually, that'll be my shout out. So I'll save that to the end, but that'll be a shout out. Magnus Carlsen just destroyed Fabiano Caruana, is rough, and then went on to win the tournament as a result. But they played 12 draws and went to overtime. And I was like, the overtime for this World Chess Championship is a joke. Even former greats that were world chess champions like Anatoly Karpov agreed. And my 2 cents is just like, in that case, just, if you draw, if it's tied at the end of regulation for the World Chess Championship, winner holds. I could see in the NFL, instead of doing a coin flip, just going top seed gets the ball first, something like that. Because in general, that's what would be my take is, if it's a tie and you've already got this weird seeding system, just favor the top seed. But whatever. So I can go either way. I think it is bad, but I also think that in general it is very hard to make people happy about tie breaks and overtime beyond, doing what hockey used to do. And hockey changed their rules. Hockey used to just basically would have first to score, but they would go on forever. And
Yeah.
there was a Calgary Flames, I want to say Tampa Bay Lightning right before the lockout. There was a playoff series that I think went to triple OT, and it's just like they just go on forever, and it's like now you people got to sleep, so eventually you just stop it. So,
There was a
all
six overtime game in 1936, but yeah, I mean, there have been a few weird ones.
but so the Bills, right, just got to one of the best games in the playoffs. Got to feel from losing there. Pat Mahomes lost. We I don't want to. There are many better podcasts than us to discuss the playoffs. You yourself could discuss better than me, but I think that would be the failure between. But some impressive playoff stuff, and I'll put you on the spot for the last one, Brian.
Of
Who are you
course.
rooting for in the finals in the Superb Owl?
I don't know if I'm rooting for anyone.
Really? No
No,
way.
not really. I mean, I guess I'm gonna lose credit for this, but I guess the California team, the Rams. I'm supposed to hate them because I'm Northern California, but Cincinnati, Ohio. What have you done for me lately? I don't care about Pro Football Focus.
I was gonna say that there's a few funny answers for me. I'm definitely going for the Rams. I'm a little conflicted. So Kroenke, the owner of the Rams, is not known to
Oh
be
yeah,
a great person. However, one of the people that I just love the most in this industry, Brett Barup, used to work for the Rams, used to work for the Kroenke
oh I
organization.
didn't
So
know that.
I'll usually go for the Rams if none of my teams are in. Additionally, I just am loving rubbing it in Dave's face that
Oh, Stafford.
Stafford is playing so well for the
But he
Rams.
agrees
So
with you, right? He knows Detroit ruined Stafford, like,
yeah. Well, did they ruin him? He's playing fantastic on a Super
or
Bowl team.
squandered is a better term for it.
Squandered is a fantastic term. So for those two reasons, for Schadenfreude, and to be fair, Dave Barry is proof of what we were saying earlier, which is just it doesn't matter how good your football team is for fans. Dave's a Lions fan, and basically every year it's like he comes in as like, you suck, you're terrible, I hate you, see you next season. So that is most football fans. And even if the Packers, even if Aaron Rodgers, as you were joking, ends up on the Denver Broncos and the
Oh,
Packers
I think
fall into
that's
disarray.
considered to be the most likely scenario right now.
All right, let's actually we'll see how much time. Oh, actually we're doing fine on time. I think how long are we going?
We're
I
at
got 10,
about
15.
an hour, so
Okay, so we'll go into overtime. We'll do our shout outs. We'll be good. We'll see how much Warriors you want to talk. So let's see. We might go through Flores really quick, even though it's a heavy topic. So
yeah.
Flores, I should have remembered what's his first name?
Brian Flores, and actually, that's a really important part of the story because part of the reason why this got exposed is Bill Belichick texted the wrong Brian. He was trying to text Brian Dable, who ended up getting the New York Giants job. He accidentally texted Brian Flores, both of who he's friends with, and told him he's getting the job, but he was wrong.
Okay, so this is full. I'm embarrassed that I didn't remember Brian. That should have been easy. Okay, so the full story is Flores is suing the NFL for basically colluding to keep him out and discrimination. And one of the things the NFL has is the Rooney Rule, right? Am I getting the rule right? I'm
That's
going to
right.
mess up names all over the place, which says you're supposed to interview a minority candidate for the job, basically. And the reason what you were just saying, the Belichick story gets even worse is Flores was up to get interviewed and the other Brian had been interviewed right in front of him. And so right before he was going into the interview, Belichick was texting him to say, congratulations. He's going, wait a minute. If I'm getting texted the other guys got the job, I never had a chance at the job. So this was a show.
It was a sham interview.
Additionally, he also went to the Denver Broncos and alleges, it's what's rough to say alleges. I'm more inclined to believe it. The Broncos, like, we vastly disagree.
He says he has the receipts, so we'll see. Story's going to develop.
This could be. I love it that can be both metaphorical and literal, because what happened is he showed up and he said that they showed up 3.5 hours late and drunk, and so he's like, this was never like, you interviewed me because you had to, but let's be clear, this was never a real interview. And I'm sorry, this comes up on the show a lot. I know it to some people is a downer, but this is where we stand. I hope I'll make sure I'll say this is where I stand, Brian. I'm sure you'll be, but it's just like it is ludicrous to assume that there is no racism and discrimination in the NFL. I mean, it's, post Kaepernick, one of the hopes I'm seeing people say is like, let's hope that this actually goes to trial, because one of the issues with Kaepernick is Kaepernick arguably won in winning a lawsuit, proving that the NFL colluded to keep him out. The issue is he never got back into the NFL. The NFL is never, still never going to let him back in. And because he settled, essentially, the receipts are hidden. He had to sign an NDA. So it's kind of like, And then also what I saw as an annoying bit of fallback is people going, see, Kaepernick was just in it for the money. I'm like, mother blanker, he could have made more money playing football than he got in that settlement, even if it
Thank
was a
you.
lot. So it's like if you're like, it's
Plus
like
the
the perfect.
endorsements and yeah.
It's well, he did get some. Well, that was funny.
Oh,
He
that's
got
true.
like
His anti-NFL endorsements mattered too, so
he got
that's
he
complicated.
got the Nike endorsement and he got a settlement. And people are like, see, this was a long con. I'm like, I hate to tell you, had he just played football and got normal endorsements, I
He was
guarantee it would have
already
been
a
for the
multimillionaire before that. Like,
and that was, I mean, that's one thing that what's ironic too about Kaepernick is people going like he didn't sacrifice whatever. Kaepernick's an example of what you kind of want, which is someone in a power of privilege taking a
that's right.
stand and losing something. And even if at the end you're like, oh, they're still well off, they're fine. It's like, yeah, but if a bunch of people that are well off do that, then things can
It's
improve.
like Muhammad Ali in the '60s, right? He went to jail during his boxing
Exactly.
career.
And what's funny is people have been like, yeah, Kaepernick's no Ali. And it's like, yeah, fine, but he's still, doing something useful. But the rough part about the settlement is like it's a moral victory. And this is always a funny example of if you're trying to take a stand, does participating in the thing and getting your message out trump not participating as a show, like basically boycotting versus like showing up and having a message. And the classic example is actually like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the Olympics, right? So there's the Black Power symbol at the Olympics, which is famous and everywhere. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar actually, while he was Lou Alcindor, boycotted the Olympics. Now, how often does Lou Alcindor boycotting the Olympics show up as important versus the other? And so the Flores question is, if he goes to court and all of these receipts get aired, how much does that help versus, if he does get some like multi-million-dollar settlement and never gets basically the Kaepernick route. Now, so the hope is that, but I can also understand being in litigation for a long amount of time is trying on anybody. Being in the public spotlight as a pariah for a long time is trying on anybody. So I can't ask that, but that's the hope. But exactly what we're saying. And what's ironic too about this story, it gets even worse as you're noting. So he was fired after 3 seasons, after back-to-back winning seasons, I think a 24-25 overall winning record over 3 seasons. But the allegedness is that the owner was also saying, I need you to tank, and was offering him money to tank games, 100,000 a game to tank, as well as this. So this is what's annoying, Brian. It's like, this is the stuff I'm like, I don't care, but okay, I guess it's a scandal. So the owner was saying, I'll pay you money to tank games, and also can you try and recruit this player, which is according to NFL rules tampering. So those two things, I'm like,
and that player was alleged to be Brady, by the way, before he went to Tampa Bay.
Gotcha. Okay. Wait, I thought he was going for not Brady. I thought it was for a scout, but was it both? Was it both Brady and then also a draft pick? I thought it was
My understanding was the owner is like, hey, we need you to recruit Brady while he's under contract. He's like, no, that's tampering.
All
and
right.
we just happened to both meet up on a yacht together accidentally, and you need to recruit him now. And he's like, no, and walked away.
So I mean,
this is what he alleges.
But so here's what's annoying is when we look at the parts of this story that infuriate me, at clearly the NFL snubbing the Rooney Rule, at clearly the NFL not having interest in giving chances to minority coaches, etc., people in front offices. That is terrible. And what's probably going to sink the owner and or make this a scandal is people going like tampering. And I'm like, we've said this before, tanking full season doesn't make sense. But in the NFL, like, the NFL is the worst, as I'm saying, right? It's like, if you want the number 1 pick in the draft, it doesn't have the same draft lottery, right? It's just the worst record wins, right? Like right out, if I understand it.
There's no lottery.
So there's no lottery. Worst team wins right out. The fans are going to show up there. So like, if you're a horrible team and you're like, heck, sit our starters for the last 4 games, get the best pick in the draft, it's not going to matter anyway, but whatever. I can't say that that's wrong. And the tampering stuff, like the same point is I've always been like, it's ridiculous that in other industries, including the NFL's front offices, right? Like general managers, coaches, etc., this stuff can happen and it's fine. It's just the players. So I'm annoyed in that the end result of this story might be that the owner gets in major trouble and there's a major scandal and it's over the tampering, or that's the hook that gets in, as opposed to being like, yeah, they're also really racist and there's a systemic problem in the NFL. And people are like, whatever. Because, yeah, same thing. Kaepernick alleged that much harder. And, just got swept under the rug.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad that angle is what's getting talked about the most. Everyone's saying, it's the first day of Black History Month and this just dropped. It's time to talk about it, right? That's good. That's definitely true. There's a lot of racism in NFL hiring. The part that I'm watching, though, even more, because of course people better, much more eloquent than me, will talk about the the racist hiring side of it. Is the competitiveness side? Is that owners are paying coaches to tank? And I was telling you earlier, this I think this could be like a Pete Rose type moment or Tim Donaghy in the NBA, where the NBA is moving so hard into betting and daily fantasy, where there's all this money on the line in the aftermarket for competitive reasons, and there's owners just completely tanking, right? So that's gonna be a fallout from this, I think, as well. But I agree, it's less important.
By the way, interesting. So I remember this. There was a story that back in the day, Yahoo would report the lines on games and was told to knock it off. Um,
And I
and
should
that was an
also
issue.
say this isn't the only allegation of it. People have piled on, like Hugh Jackson, who went like 1-31 his first 2 years with the Bengals, is like, oh yeah, the owner was paying me to tank, and then he got
Nice.
fired right after, right? So just to finish up real quickly, there's I think another one or two. This is a brand new story, so we're gonna have to see where it goes. But there's multiple teams with allegations that they're deliberately trying to lose. So that's really bad for the competitiveness of the league. But I have to say, like, before this came out, I was like, Brian Flores is a Belichick guy. Is it plausible that he's an asshole that's hard to work with? Yeah, it is. But then when it came out that the big thing where the team was like, we can't work with anymore, is he was anti-tanking, that puts him right in my book. Screw tanking. Good job, Brian
Very, very
Flores.
much. Ironically, like the same. Although Hinkie got kicked for tanking, is like, yeah, they weren't mad at all. Like the no asshole argument. Like, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it because that's funny. You just brought up Belichick, of course, in the NBA. Popovich will be the popular ones. Like, you're out of room to talk about any issues with like personalities, meaning you can't have a coach. And then like Jason Kidd is the most recent example of like there is no up and coming coach at all, especially women. Like it's really a shame that it is fantastic for Becky Harmon to be in the WNBA. That is fantastic.
Liz
It
Cambridge threw some shade about her salary, though. This is a whole nother story.
well, that's oh man. We'll have to
That's a
talk.
big can of worms.
We agree. By the way, it's annoying,
Yes, yes.
but to the and they're again that we so again, like to this tanking thing, even like we agree that in any of these leagues that make arbitrary bullshit rules about player pay and where player movement, that it is very frustrating to see those being viewed as scandals. So like the WNBA, Dave Barry got fired from Forbes for this. He got fired as a freelancer from Forbes, which is
Yep.
freaking ridiculous for basically knowing that the WNBA is underpaying its players. So that is still very
Oh,
much
I
a real
forgot
story.
about that. That's right.
But the Becky Harmon, like
Hammond.
anybody or Hammond,
Yeah.
why sorry, I was getting too many names. Appreciate you being here, Brian, because
Yep.
otherwise I'd make many more mistakes. But Hammond basically, her any argument against like her deserving a front a coach job with like Jason Kidd around, it's like they're whenever anybody's like, this we can't play with this coach, they got a personality thing or they got this conflict. It's like that argument only works if you don't have a bunch of really respected coaches that have that exact problem. So it's kind of a bullshit argument, and we believe teams tank. Everybody knows they tank. That's what's annoying. It's like it's so frustrating for this bullshit thing. So
And this
we'll
is why, in retrospect, the Dolphins' ownership narrative about Flores is kind of bullshit, right? Because it's like, well, he was an okay coach, and he was, on a comeback and bringing the team back up, but he's hard to get along with, so we don't like him. And we just seen so many examples of like Urban Meyer just had a complete meltdown with the Jaguars lately. Just all these white coaches that are
that
so
was
much worse.
amazing.
Yeah, the straw that broke the camel's back was a report that he was kicking his players while they were stretching, like just crazy abusive stuff, right? So I'm just trying to say, like, it's not not very balanced as well.
Yeah, and then all I was going to mention, you're right on gambling, and what I was going to say is, as recently as a decade ago, Yahoo would get in trouble for airing the sports line on like football games, and recently I was watching like a bowling episode, just like the PBA, because there's two famous YouTubers, Kyle and Brad, and they played each other on television. And they were noting that when their game was up, that the line, like that basically the Fox broadcast was broadcasting their line. It's like, yeah, go bet on FanDuel and DraftKings on this PBA bowling
Yeah.
event. So you're not wrong. So that the irony is, I think you're right, is from a moralistic point, sorry, we've seen this in the past. That is probably not going to move the needle, but the money is. And we are seeing now that like the people that are paying the big bucks to these leagues are like, we have to sell a betting product. And if there is a betting scandal, not even necessarily a betting, here's what's funny. It might not even be a betting scandal, but if it was something where, say, hypothetically, a story came out where an NFL team admitted to cheating, you might have a betting site that had to pay a bunch of slips back. And they're like, we're a big sponsor, and one of your coaches just cost us millions of dollars. Do you want us to be a big sponsor next year, or is that coach gone? So it's kind of weird to point it out that way, and I agree with you.
Because there's always been this tension, right? For as long as there's been NFL betting, which is since the beginning, is that like the incentives of the coaches are not aligned with the people that are betting at all, right? Like, they're going to kneel the ball down instead of trying to cover, but it's late in the game and they're ahead.
I'm trying to remember the classic one for fantasy and betting is when you got when like you're saying, where the clock. So you have the wide open touchdown and the player runs vertical, right? Or
Yeah.
parallel to the goal line and out of bounds to where the clock. And people just like, it's like that
Yeah.
was a fantasy football touchdown that you just cost me. If they just kneel the clock or just kick a field goal, to just keep the score, it's like that's the spread you just knocked. There's so much there, and even
It's
if it's
all
the
in the
right
margins,
strategy.
right? That whole industry, all in the margins.
So yeah, agreed. All right. Any other? That was pretty heavy NFL stuff. More, I like your point. More as it develops, because who knows where this is going? It might be around for a while. It might turn into like Kaepernick and Donaghy, where it just kind of gets swept under the rug and happens behind closed doors for years. And then basically, that's the rough part. You brought up Pete Rose, we brought up Kaepernick, we brought up Donaghy. In all of these cases, the league basically made an example of one person, then basically just covered their ears and hoped that people would forget. And it's very effective. Just there's no such thing as bad press, no press. The kind of follow up to that would be like, no press is bad, as in like if you're not getting covered, it's bad for you.
No, I mean, my last thing on this is it's going to be a political power fight, right? We actually did see Donald Sterling get kicked out of the NBA because he just did too much bad stuff and it got public and the players rebelled, right? So will the Dolphins owner, lose a power fight and get kicked out of the club? We'll see.
I mean, Sterling made billions of dollars. I mean, that seems most likely. Like Sterling made billions of dollars off of that.
Yes.
The NBA didn't have to fix it. I mean,
yeah, poor Donald
owner,
Sterling, right?
you had a rich racist owner in a league that has had many other issues. Other teams have had similar things come up, but you made an example of him. You kicked him out, which meant you didn't have to fix it. And I could see the NFL doing the same thing.
Yeah, a lot to come on this.
All right, Brian, I'm just going to let you comment on a point I made. Basically, this is slowly gestating into a piece, maybe, or it might just be a couple of podcast sound bites because I did it last week too. But I basically noted that the Golden State Warriors this season are a Moneyball team. And so there are a lot of easy comparables. So you've got Andre Iguodala, Otto Porter, Draymond Green, Gary Payton II. And so I even like, to the Moneyball book, you could kind of look at Andre Iguodala kind of as David Justice, this older player that's, past his prime, but still has a couple of good seasons. Gary Payton II is a G League call-up. Draymond Green is a second round pick. That is a Moneyball player. He does all this other really good stuff to win, but doesn't score. And Otto Porter, right, was this injured player that they picked up for cheap that's been paying off dividends. So that's why the team is winning a season. I mean, Curry is great as well, but Curry is also, I mean, the rough part. I know you, me, and Jeremy have all been looking at him really closely, like with a fine-tooth comb, and he's injured. I'm sorry. Like, either he has the biggest case of the yips that has lasted about a month and a half now, or he is injured. And I'm inclined to lean.
There's two things that have happened with Steph Curry. One, Anthony Slater, who's probably the best beat writer for the Warriors. He's with The Athletic, right? He's like, yeah, I've been watching practice, and I think this hand, it really is a thing. Then something else happened where it comes out that, I can't remember where this came from, but basically Curry has actually made a mechanical adjustment. he was shooting before out on his tippy toes, and now he's shooting more on the balls of his feet. That's the allegation. So
which could be injury related. He could be changing up his.
Those fit together. I like this point. Yeah. But he was better in his last game, and he rested last night. So we'll see what happens. I mean, you know where I usually go with this. It's just variance, but I'm not too worried about Curry.
The problem is it's variance, but it's been a trend. So that's the question. But I mean, that's the funny question is very Shaq-like. Is he going to be healthy come playoffs? If yes, you know, I made the joke. I basically said Draymond Green and Steph Curry were Shaq and Kobe. If they're healthy come playoffs, you're fine. Draymond Green is probably out for the season. Steph Curry has been looking a little off. So sorry, Brian, if I curse the team. But the remainder of the team, those other 4 players that I mentioned, are really Moneyball moves. G League call-up, an injured player that they got for cheap, an older player that they got for cheap, a player that, you know, Draymond Green, you know, player that does all these things that go underappreciated. And then the big wrecking ball to this point about this Bay Area team, you know, same area as Moneyball, same area as the Oakland Athletics, is that as soon as Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins kind of get the spotlight, they get the green light. So I keep laughing every game Klay Thompson gets more minutes than Gary Payton II, because Klay Thompson is horrible right now. And Andrew Wiggins, now you noted there is a possible conspiracy theory about why Andrew Wiggins got the nod, but that's still not enough for me. I mean, Andrew Wiggins, between the players and the players vote on the MVP, on All-Stars, as well as the fans. The fans, that's where there's a rumor where there is allegedly a K-pop star who was like, hey, you got to vote for Wiggins, and that's a huge market.
Well, we know what happened. It's Bam Bam, right? And he posted it, and it got like hundreds of thousands of likes. The thing we just don't know is, what did that translate to in terms of votes? The campaign happened. We just don't know.
It could have been a large. I mean, back in the day when it was all fan voting, you would see things like injured players. I mean, Klay Thompson this year, in fact, I think was close to, or if not above, Draymond Green in voting. Amari Stoudemire one year, you know, got into the All-Star game even though he was injured the whole season. We've seen fan voting do that in the past, but then also player voting. But I'm just saying that my assertion, right, is that at the end of this season, or an end of 2 seasons, Andrew Wiggins is going to be on a contract with this team. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Otto Porter, Gary Payton. And we already saw it with Andre Iguodala, right? Like, what was the benefit of letting Andre Iguodala walk? By letting Andre Iguodala walk, the team was able to tank and get James Wiseman, who is doing so freaking much for you right now, right? So it's kind of like, it's just very, it's the same as I was saying as the Nuggets at the beginning, where it's just very amusing that you have a successful Moneyball story, and the team with that you can very clearly see by their actions midseason doesn't get what happened. So the Warriors are.
This is such a good point, Dre. I love this point.
Are just one of the ultimate like stumble on wins teams, and it is so frustrating, because that's the thing, is we're critical and people are like, but they win games. You're like, yeah, but they don't know why they win games, and they're not ever really going to win that argument. So is what it is.
Yeah, no, that's right. All the Warriors media and podcasts are talking about Jonathan Kuminga and Jordan Poole, right? These are the players the Warriors have developed, and they're getting a lot better, and they can create their own shots, and these are like mainstream type of players. And I'll say there is something to that. Poole, I didn't understand why he was in the league a few years ago. Now I'm like, okay, he looks like a guy who could be an NBA rotation player in the playoffs pretty soon. He's not quite there yet. Kuminga, same thing. He looked like he was not ready to be on an NBA court at all. Now he kind of looks like he does. So they deserve some credit for that. But your point is true. Those players that everyone is focusing on just don't deserve the credit for the winning. It's these guys they picked up as an afterthought. So let's talk about Gary Payton, who's, you know, maybe the best story out of all these players. Otto Porter, he's been really good in the past. Maybe what he's not doing is too surprising, but Gary Payton is 28, has never done this before. The Warriors cut him at the beginning of the season to save money, and then brought him back after he cleared waivers on a non-guaranteed contract. So that's how much they believed in him. They let every other team take a shot at him before they brought him back and put him into the rotation. Now, that's not going to happen now. You know, they know how good he is, and maybe he hasn't played well enough in the past to justify, you know, them believing in them as much as they should. But at the same time, I don't think they deserve a ton of credit for being prescient about Gary Payton. So, yeah, there's something to what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was hard to know. In 400 minutes with the Wizards, he looked pretty good, but that's only 400 minutes, and he looked really good in 40 minutes with the Warriors last season.
Yep,
But again, what I'll say is, I'm not going to fault them for cutting him and doing what you're doing. But I'm not, to the exact same point, I'm not going to. He is, according to our numbers, he is the top wins per due getter on the team this season,
yep,
which I know many people would be like, "You're crazy. What are you talking about?" And all I'll say is, like, you have to agree that that was luck. That wasn't intentional. And
that's
Otto
right.
Porter Jr. was a great. We loved that pickup, but it's also luck that an injured player is playing well, and the same with Andre Iguodala. So it's just, it is very frustrating. And I like having it out there. And one thing it is kind of nice in a mean way is, I'm not tremendously worried about the Warriors winning a title. And if they do, I can be happy, because it means that, like, Curry got healthy, and maybe Curry gets a Finals MVP. So we'll see.
Let me give them some credit, though. One of my biggest criticisms of them, starting about 2 years ago when they started all these crazy, like you were saying, they were tanking and doing all these weird trades. I called the Doctor Strange strategy at the time. We have a 1 in 27 million chance to make this work. But no, no, they did get lucky, and with these players that they picked up. But let's see, how should I put this? What I've criticized them for is investing money in the wrong players and then depending too much on these minimum players in the past. Because they've always been able to do this, right? They brought in JaVale McGee and David West and just all these great veterans that really contributed to their championship runs, and they did it for nothing. And my complaint is, what if you actually invest money in these good players instead of trying to get lucky with them? Are you really persuasive enough that you can persuade these top veterans to play for you for cheap year after year after year? And I was doing a victory lap the past 2 seasons because the answer was no. They tried to recruit Marc Gasol, who I would say is probably a bad idea. But the point is they lost out to him. The Lakers, had a better were able had a more convincing argument. Same thing with I'm forgetting the guy who went to the Clippers, Batum. The Warriors kept trying to get Batum over and over again, but other teams were luring him there. Well, I think they proved me wrong this year. They have gotten back to finding these super cheap players and getting greedy again. So the greed is starting to pay off once more.
Well, I think it'll pay off for a season, and then the question is, the old formula was greedy and then luck into a Finals MVP waltzing onto the team despite the team not being able to really get them. Question is that going to happen again? Are you going to get what a Giannis or heck Embiid, right? Are you going to get them?
Yeah.
Ben Simmons. I mean, that's what's going to happen, right? Isn't it? Ben Simmons is going to waltz on the stupid team. It's going to happen, Brian. Never mind. I'm taking this back. I'm taking back the criticism because it's going to look
Whoever
silly.
gets Simmons, man, that team is going to have a winning streak.
I think it's gonna. Okay, here's my take, Ryan. I think it's going to be Brooklyn Nets in the off season. And I think
I
that
like that
I
theory.
think the Morey tampering angle is right. So I think Harden ends up on the 76ers. The Nets get him. Okay, let's go to shoutouts. Here's a funny one. I mentioned I've been on kind of a bowling kick, and I was listening to a bowling podcast, and what was amusing is so it's Chris Barnes, one of the greatest bowlers of all time. He looks like Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe, huge shout out, a resident of Appleton, Wisconsin. He's from
Oh,
there, and
interesting.
he hosted Saturday Night Live, and they made a reference to Appleton, Wisconsin. What I'll say is there is a distinct, even within Wisconsin, there is a distinct Appleton accent. So they were making fun of the Wisconsin Appleton accent on Saturday Night Live. I'm like, that's Wisconsin, but Appleton sounds a little different. I don't even have it, but I got an ear for it. But anyway, so Chris Barnes kind of looks like Willem Dafoe. On a podcast, he was talking about the NBA and was joking about Michael Jordan and saying that Michael Jordan, was frozen out of the league for gambling, and he didn't play baseball willingly. That's the conspiracy theory, and you could maybe have something here too, which is maybe Ben Simmons is a pariah. Maybe the NBA is like, hey, look it, we are not going to approve a move of Ben Simmons to the Nets to get Harden back to Morey. You got to wait a season. Like, it can happen, but we're not letting it happen this season. That's my conspiracy theory. So, and it's not even that big of a conspiracy theory. It just could happen. But anyway, so shout outs, Brian. Bowling, as I mentioned. So, got to give a shout out to Jason Belmonte, who is the greatest bowler of all time. And it happened underneath my nose because not less than like 5 years ago, maybe seven, Pete Weber won his 10th U.S. major or 10th bowling major. And I was like, oh, that's a very interesting argument for him being one of the greatest of all time.
Wait, he must have been in his mid 50s then, or
He was
older.
super old. He is still the only bowler to have won the U.S. Open 5 times, which is like an
Wow.
amazing record. That being said, Jason Belmonte is gunning because Jason Belmonte, the top bowler, used to be 10, and Pete Weber tied that. Belmonte's at 14. He just came back this
Wow.
last weekend and won his 14th major for PBA. Amazing one. And I meant to mention this on the show. He is a two-handed bowler, and that is a contentious style of bowling. And I have compared him to Steph Curry, as in he's a person with a new style that just like completely wrecks the game, and he like completely destroyed old records. So like Steph Curry versus Jason Belmonte, very similar players, and we'll see. So he's got the all-time majors record. The question is if he's going to be able to catch Walter Reyes Jr.'s all-time titles, number of titles that he's won. That's a much harder one to do. And he's already 38, but bowlers tend to be able to go into their 40s. And heck, Norm Duke is an amazing bowler, and he's still in his 50s bowling well. So
Norm Duke is still bowling? Wow.
Norm Duke lost a fine for the major that I'm just talking about that Jason Belmonte won. Norm Duke lost the basic. There was like a play. If this makes any sense, there's a play-in round. So there's like almost March Madness here. Like 4 qualifying rounds, and then those players that win those play each other, and then the winner of that won the whole thing. So this is a really hard tournament because you got to win a major tournament, and then you have to win a playoff of the players that won those tournaments. Norm Duke was in the semifinals, one of those major tournaments against Tommy Jones and other amazing players. So it's amazing. So there's hope that Jason Belmonte will stick around and be the best all time. And his argument is he won't keep that. He's kind of arguing almost very similar to like Steph Curry and 3-point shooting. What we were saying, someone is going to come in behind him with his style and surpass him. Is what he thinks. So I could buy that. Anyway, so I'm giving him a shout out because he won 14th major. Shout out to Rafael Nadal, who won his 21st Grand Slam title in the stupidest fashion possible. As we already talked this on the show, Djokovic, by not getting vaccinated, kept himself from playing in the Australian Open, an event that he has dominated. And it's likely, based on the age and injury of Rafael Nadal and how good Djokovic is, that Djokovic will go on to be the all-time Grand Slam winner. But at the moment, Nadal is the all-time holder with his recent win in the Australian Open. And then I already mentioned Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen just won the Tata Steel tournament for, I believe, the 8th time, as I mentioned, in decisive fashion, beating Fabio Caruana in the last round he played. So, the joking tweet I made is I said, shout out, and I'm doing the shout out here too, Brian, shout out to the underdogs for winning major tournaments this last weekend. So that's my shout out. You got any others? If not, yeah, it's been a long show now. We can head out.
I do have one shout out. So we've talked about this American historical figure on this show before, Marine General Smedley Butler, who he was a general in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and was involved in a lot of the American imperialist wars, and then later renounced that when he was older. Wrote a book called War is a Racket, and then helped fight for the World War I veterans, the bonus army, getting paid their bonus for reenlisting in World War I, and then also foiled a coup attempt, which is why this is getting a lot of news lately, in the 1930s, called the so-called business coup attempt, where a bunch of rich guys like the DuPont family and Alfred P. Sloan from General Motors apparently tried to recruit him to overthrow the country. So why am I shouting him out right now? There is a new book out on Smedley Butler called, let me bring it up here, Gangsters of Capitalism, Jonathan M. Katz. And I've known about this book was coming out for a year or two, but it's, like I said, I think it's because of the business coup plot angle. It's really blown up. Like, I'm seeing Jonathan Katz all over cable news and podcasts, pushing his new book out about Smedley Butler. So yeah, go read about General Butler.
I hope people are cognizant of it, because that is a terrifying point. And I think we've on this show many times mentioned how a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, history was preordained this way for the good guys. That's a funny part of U.S. history. Look at the United States. the good guys a lot of the time. Sorry, but people will be like, look at the good guys won. And it's like you don't realize how close things were to being just slightly different with a few small things. So we'll
Yep,
see. All
that's
right.
right. That's my shout out.
Well, anyway, that has been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. As mentioned, I am Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster got it right on the first try. I kept inverting Brian, so I'd go Brian Boxscore Brian, aka Brian Foster. Got it right. Brian Foster, aka Boxscore Brian. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, all of your podcast platforms, the Box Score Geek Show. Find us on YouTube channel Nerd Numbers. And we did go live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. One of these days I'll start promoting that, Brian. We could have today. We knew we were going ahead of time and I just dropped the ball. So that's on me. But anyway,
I've got an auto tweet, I think, but yeah.
All right. So we'll see y'all next time.